appointment to the Interim Committee on the Judiciary, and I hereby call this meeting to order. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Berg. Senator Carroll. Senator Deneen. Senator Neal. Senator Schickel. Senator Stivers. Senator Storm. Senator Turner. Here. Senator Wheeler. Representative Banta.
Present.
Representative Blanton. Here. Representative Bratcher. Here. Representative Bray. Representative Burke.
Here.
Representative Decker. Representative Dietz.
Here.
Representative Doan. Representative Flannery. Here. Representative Griffey. Representative Herron. Representative Kulkarni.
Present.
Representative Lewis. Representative Maddox.
Here.
Representative Mosier. Representative Nemus.
Here.
Representative Petrie.
Here.
Representative Rawlings.
Present.
Representative Sharp.
Present.
Representative Stevenson. Representative Wilson. Co-Chair Westerfield. Co-Chair Elliott.
I'm here, and my Senate counterpart will be here later. He informed me he left Hopkinsville at about 8:30, so he will be joining us later. We do have a quorum. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no, and the minutes are adopted. Our first item, or actually number 3 on the agenda, but the first presentation is court-appointed special advocates. And we have with us Andrea Bruns, the state director of the Kentucky CASA network. And we also have Tammy Wilson, the executive director of CASA of the Bluegrass. And Tammy happens to be my Boyle County constituent. We usually see each other in court, so it's nice to see you in another setting, and I appreciate you being here this morning to share with us what CASA does. So you may introduce yourselves to the record and then proceed. Please make sure your green light is on. That means when you see green.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Representative Elliott, for having CASA of the Bluegrass here to talk about the important work that we do. My name is Tammy Wilson. I'm the executive director. CASA of the Bluegrass is a regional program covering 4 counties: Anderson, Boyle, Franklin, and Mercer. Over the past 5 years, we've served 759 children. In 2023, 49 CASA volunteers served 173 children. CASA volunteers invested a total of 3,832 hours and drove 32,036 miles in 2023. We have volunteers that live in Casey County and travel to this month alone.
I know where that is.
Right. This month alone, she has traveled to Louisville, and then she traveled to Covington to visit her CASA child. So the miles that they put in is as many as of the hours that they put in. CASAs are often invited to the foster care review boards and all treatment team meetings.
What's over in Charlottesville? What's wrong with it?
And this next slide basically just shows you what a CASA does. So I'm just going to kind of talk about that off the slide way. So our CASA volunteers are just everyday citizens. Example 1, we have young Emily who lives in Casey County, who's 22 years old, works at Pizza Hut. We have Teresa Nolette, who is a retired engineer from Corning. The amount of work that they have put in over the past year on their cases is just outstanding. What an individual will do is they go through a training that is a 32-hour pre-service training. And then once they are finished with that training, they take a case, but they're appointed by the judge. They make sure that they visit that child monthly. They talk with all the people involved in the case, the teachers, the foster parents, the biological parents, the physicians, to make sure that they have a full and complete picture of that child. The way I've kind of broke it down to my daughter, who's now 18, so she was 8 when I started at CASA, is, every day you have me that's advocating for your, educational needs, your, make sure that you're going to the dentist, make sure that all of that is in place. That's kind of what our advocates do to step up for these children that at a time that they're the most vulnerable because they're in the family court system due to abuse or neglect. So our volunteers have to make sure that they know that child as a whole in order so that they can advocate for them fully. So then once they have that, okay, yeah, we can go to the next slide. That's basically just what a CASA does. Role of a CASA volunteer in dependency, neglect, and abuse cases. CASA volunteers are objective, community-based volunteers who are appointed by the judge to serve in child abuse, neglect, and dependency case. We are appointed by a judge, but we can also be requested by DCBS, the parents' attorneys, the GALs in the case, and even sometimes we'll be requested by a parent or a foster parent. So anybody can request, but the judge has to actually appoint a CASA. During their time on a case, CASAs research all facts and information, advocate through written reports to the family court judge, facilitate court order obligations, and monitor progress and circumstances. So again, the two ladies that I was speaking of, Emily, who is the young 22-year-old, she travels twice a month to visit her child who is in a residential treatment facility. And so really and truly, Emily is the sole person that visits this child monthly that she sees outside of a clinical setting. And that a lot of time is just the most important thing for them. They have that person that's present, that shows up, because I'm sure, as Representative Elliott can attest to, the amount of social workers and different parties that change hands throughout the time of a case is a lot. And so for this child, a CASA is the consistent person that is there, that is showing up for them to advocate for their needs. And then Teresa, the other lady that I was speaking about earlier, she just, the amount of things that we can actually request in our recommendations can go from anywhere from educational, advocacy. I always say, hey, if you think that your child needs a trip to the moon, you request a trip to the moon. You recommend it. All the judges can do is say no, but at least you're voicing what that child wants. Teresa saw that her child that she advocates for could benefit from equine therapy. And so she made that recommendation. It was accepted, and that child just finished up 2 weeks of equine therapy. So there's so many different things that our volunteers advocate for on that child's behalf because of the fact that they've got to know that child in a full picture. And the number one thing, obviously, is safety and permanency. But the CASA is there to remind everyone in that hearing or those cases as it's going forward, that they still need to make sure that they're being advocated for their educational, their physical, their mental health, their spiritual health. All of those things still need to be advocated for that child. And we also make sure that we're reminding the courts how long that child has been in the family court system and out of home care. And also, I talk really fast, so I apologize. Okay. How CASA works a case with DCBS and GALs. Again, I feel like our program works really well with our local GALs and DCBS. We have a great relationship with them. We understand and we try to point out to our volunteers that DCBS workers, have a lot more cases per, for each social worker, whereas most of our CASA volunteers have one, possibly two cases. So the fact that, they can pour in so much more time than what sometimes a DCBS worker does, because there are only 30 days, in a month. So if they have 30 cases, then it's kind of hard for them to make sure they're having that interaction. Our CASAs also conference cases and communicate with the DCBS worker. I think our staff, especially, and our local DCBS office in Franklin, Anderson, Boyle, and Mercer, we all have a great relationship with our DCBS workers and the GAL and our judges. We're very thankful for the time and the commitment that GALs put in. We realize that the amount of money that they get paid, they're probably not ever going to retire on that amount. So they're doing it because they have the heart to make, children's lives better. CASA makes sure that they provide recommendations in a court report to all parties prior to court. So we send our court report that our volunteers prepare. It has all of their interviews that they've done, the strengths of the family, the child's wants, and then based on all that information that they've gathered, then what the CASA themselves feels like is the best interest for that child. They make those recommendations, and they prepare that court report, and we send that court report out a week in advance to all parties involved in the case. And a lot of times I feel like that it's information that is more detailed because, again, they're focusing on that child. And I'm not sure that we've ever had anyone say, we could have really just went without that CASA report. There wasn't anything extra. We always make sure that our reports are painting a full picture of the child.
Okay, thanks, Tammy. I'm Andrea Bruns. I'm the State Director of the Kentucky CASA Network. Thank you for having us here, and thank you to all of you for supporting the mission of our organization. So just a little bit about KCN. The CASA program is in the Kentucky Revised Statute, 62500. Our role, we develop CASA programs. I'm going to show you a slide in a minute to talk about where we are. I love coming here because every time I come, I can tell you that we're serving more kids with a CASA program statewide, thanks to you all. We currently are in 97 counties. 2016, before we had state funding, we were only in about 36, 37 counties. I think not quite to 40. So we are on our road. We've been exhibiting at the state fair this week, and the 120 theme, we're on the road to 120. We are going to get CASA in all 120 counties, and that is our mission. To do that, we've been regionalizing for expansion and sustainability of our programs. And so we actually are serving more counties with fewer programs because of that regional structure. This is a little bit of our map. We do keep this map for historical purposes to go back to show what our growth is. We are in the process of creating a brand new statewide growth plan. We are really hoping that by 2027, we have this map colored all in dark blue on our map so that every county has a CASA. We think we can get there. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but we think we'll be close. And this is a little bit about the system of which our CASAs navigate. We update this every year. So you can see the statewide DCBS numbers and then the petition file numbers. If you go back and look, 2016, 2017, there's been a huge decline in both petitions before the court and DCBS substantiations, which I know you're all well aware of. Why that matters a little bit for us is we are only on cases where there are active petitions. Unfortunately, we don't have enough CASA volunteers for every petition. We have about 1,300 in the state, and you still see that we have over 16,000 new petitions every year, children before the court. So I know we don't have a lot of time, so with that, I'm happy to open it up for questions for either Tammy or myself.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate your presentation. I know, Tammy, you have some other staff with you if you'd like to introduce them from
Absolutely.
Danville.
So I have my program development coordinator, Casey Atwood, and then our volunteer coordinator that covers all 4 of our counties that we serve, Sarah Hendricks.
Thank you very much, and I do want to say as a GAL and Parents Council that especially in the role of a GAL, CASA is very helpful because sometimes it's difficult to interact with the children or the child as much as your volunteers are able to do, and so it's a great service to the GAL and the court and the county attorney. And you also have a dedicated board.
Very much so.
Of volunteers who are out raising money and working hard, and a lot of times even volunteering in cases themselves. So I know that's an important aspect of CASA. Co-Chair Westerfield, you're recognized.
Chairman, thanks so much. Andrea, good to see you. Thank you for the presentation. Sorry I missed the first few minutes there as I was making my drive up. Thank you also for the update, but to the extent that you can answer it, and maybe this isn't the right venue, so if you feel like you can't answer it, that's perfectly fine. But I'm curious about Christian County's CASA. I'm thrilled that the Lakes region is picking that up. Thank you for that update, and give them my thanks, please, for doing that. Because as the chairman said, I'm a supporter of CASA, and what your all's staff and your volunteers do is a mission critical service that children all over Kentucky rely on. And you said 97 counties, just fantastic.
Yeah.
At one point, there was an MOU being considered between the state board and Christian counties, and then the next thing I knew, the Lakes region was taking over and Christian counties was shuttered. Can you explain what happened there?
So the board decided they just notified us that they,
So the MOU, was it ever signed?
no, they did not want to sign the MOU.
Okay.
And that was, just for context, there was additional technical assistance in the MOU.
There was.
And that MOU is sort of Tammy, I'm sure, can talk about her QA that she goes through with the KCN. And probably a lot of our programs have said to us, we love your QA process because it really helps us be better. So the MOU was sort of enhanced services by our staff to help.
I read it. So
Yeah.
they asked me to take a look at
Yeah.
it. And I thought it was pretty nice, pretty reasonable, and a lot of help from the state board for the local organization. I wonder, do you all have anything like that for other programs around the state?
Yeah, if a program needs any additional assistance, we are there to do that and write that in and say, hey, and I'll just say, Christian County, we're so excited that there's going to still be a program there. I actually had a call with Joyce Closet yesterday.
Good.
Love hearing about what they're doing down there and how they can help support, recruit more volunteers. And, we will have a program, and those 6 volunteers are staying on, and they're very dedicated. And what we do when we get new staff or new directors, new board members, we have a whole onboarding process. And our quality assurance process, I think, and I think that our national group will say that we're top when it comes to that, because it's really important that the work being done is having an outcome and is high quality. So
I think that was reflected in the MOU.
Yeah.
You're to be commended.
Thank
Because
you.
were putting in a ton of effort, or offering to put in a ton of effort to make sure that local program from the statewide, for what the board could do, in fact, I think going above and beyond what the board ordinarily would be doing, from a governance standpoint, to really make sure that the work product was excellent. So I'm very thankful.
Well, I
and
appreciate
it.
that, and we have high standards, and we do not apologize for those. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Representative Kulkarni.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for your presentation over here. And thank you for all the work that you do. In the interest of time, I will, you can get back to me with this information. I was wondering about the training for CASA volunteers in terms of time. I've tried to find time in my schedule to kind of go through it, but I just wanted to get some information about that, criteria, time frame, all of that. If you want to give a brief summary.
So it's like our pre-service training is 32 hours. We offer them 4 times a year. It's usually one night a week and 3.5-hour class. And then you have a court observation that you have to go and observe court. But we try to work with everyone that wants to. We can also offer that online. I will say that I'm not as big supporter as on the online one, because I feel like that when we have the in-person, we're building that community. We're sitting there, we're seeing each other, and so I like anything that's more in person. But we constantly are having training so that we can offer that. And we'll do that on a Saturday. We've offered Saturday ones, we've offered it during the day, in the evening, so that we can try to make sure that we're hitting everybody, because we don't want it just to be that retired individuals are our only volunteer pool. We want all walks of life, all, like I was sharing earlier about Emily, who is, 22, has a full-time job and still makes time to do this. So,
And a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead.
Following up on that, and again, you can get this information to me later, but I was wondering how costs are calculated. Is it cost per child, cost per volunteer training? And, because you mentioned how much you were able to expand in terms of the regions that you cover, the counties that you cover based on state funding.
So we have a funding formula that we administer to the programs, and programs get a baseline of funding, and then they're actually compensated for their active volunteer numbers. So we don't necessarily look at need, because you can need something, but if you're not serving that need, then you don't need the funding for that. So traditionally, the Louisville and Lexington and higher populated areas are getting more funding because they have more volunteers. But we're regionalizing, so I know Bluegrass, I think, has maybe around maybe 60, 70 volunteers now, but we now have 4 or 5 programs that have over 100 volunteers. And also, I will say that our Eastern Kentucky programs, we do a little special carve out for them because the sustainability funding is really challenging in Eastern Kentucky. And so, in some areas you have the resources that you just don't in others, and we do have to look at that. And essentially, if you build it, we will provide services or funding to help you. But it's a public-private partnership. So it's not just, sit back and get a check from the state, coffers. It really is fundraise, get other grants, and diversify.
Thank you.
Thank you. I noticed that Taylor County and Greene County will have programs soon. What local network will they be a part of? Has that been decided? Or
So our Lincoln Trail program, so the program that was Nelson County expanded into Washington and Marion County, and then Taylor and Greene are part of that judicial district. So the plan is that program is really interested in picking up Taylor and Greene County. If you look at our map,
and they don't have a family court in
it's district court, yeah, district court.
Yes.
And even, we don't have family court yet, obviously, in all of our counties. So the rules and everything is the same.
Right.
But it can be maybe a little bit more challenging. I know in that program, we started working with the judge there during COVID in 2020, and they just went in last year. So it took a little bit more time. But that program, I know they're looking at maybe doing something with Campbellsville University, maybe having an office in Taylor County. As you see from this map, and we're sort of strategizing, I know I've talked to some folks and some legislators down in Adair, Cumberland County, and how we're going to kind of move in that direction. Our Pulaski folks, Casey County, we're ready to move and see who wants to take Casey County, whether it's Bluegrass or our Pulaski program. So it's sort of having those conversations.
We'll have to facilitate a meeting there. I
Yes,
think we
yes.
had talked about
Yes.
that, Tammy, over the session, I know, when you came up. So, Well, thank you so much for your presentation, for coming on a Friday.
Thank you.
We typically don't meet on Fridays, but yesterday we had committee meetings at our beautiful state fair, so that's why we're here on Friday. So thank you for being here, and we appreciate your time and the work that you're doing. It's truly making a difference. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is from the Department of Public Advocacy, and we have Public Advocate Preston and Deputy Public Advocate West with us. And I'm sorry. If you'll introduce yourselves, and we'll assist you with the presentation, and you may begin. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you again. It's always great to appear before Judiciary because I'm looking at allies of the public defender system and strong supporters. And many of you, we've had conversations, sometimes not seeing the world exactly the same way, but it's always a productive conversation. And I know that at our core, you are supportive and have demonstrated that through the years of the public defender system. My name's Damon Preston. I'm the public advocate.
I'm Scott West. I'm the Deputy Public Advocate.
Today I want to talk about issues that DPA is facing right now. Here's a brief agenda of what I'm going to do, and I'm going to, for a limited amount of time, I'm going to be going quickly through this. I want to give a quick update on some issues that have come before the legislature before, just to tell you where we are on those. I'm going to talk about some challenges that we have as a result of decisions that have been made in this building and across the street in the judicial branch as well. Then I want to talk about other significant challenges. These are some issues that have come up that we've never discussed here, so that's why I'm going to go pretty quickly through the first two to spend some time on that. And finally, as always in a good presentation, I'm going to end with some specific asks of things that we could use down the road from you. Let me start with the updates. Here's our general numbers for the last year. This is from our annual report from 23. We have not yet completed our 24 annual report. You can see all the cases we do, over 140,000 cases. Our agency's responsible for statewide. This includes the Jefferson County numbers. Average caseload of about 365 cases, which hopefully sounds like a lot to you, a lawyer handling that number of cases in each year from start to finish. That's when you put those numbers in with nationally recognized standards, that's about 32% above. That means each individual public defender on average is handling a caseload that's 32% above what the national recognized standards are for public defenders. So all the efficiencies of the public defender system's already worked into that number, and we're still over 32% higher than what we should have. We get asked a lot about our relationship with the private bar. Are we taking all the cases? Are there opportunities for private attorneys? So I've included that on the right part of this screen to show the extent to which we work with the private bar, mostly through cases that raise conflicts of interest so that our local office can't handle cases. So we work with 146 private attorneys and spend about $3.5 million last year. These are FY24 numbers, $3.5 million last year on conflict cases. Because we've had staffing challenges and lots of vacancies statewide, we implement what we call court plans, which is where we do a specific contract with a private attorney to handle a specific docket. Like Webster District Court on Thursday morning, we'll contract with a private attorney to handle that docket rather than a number of cases. We call those court plans. We're working with 43 separate private attorneys on those types of plans, and about $2.5 million last year went to that. So altogether, almost $6 million we spent on private attorneys. And the total number of courts, keeping in mind I mentioned Webster District, if we did Webster District and Webster Circuit and Webster Family, if they have one, that would be 3 separate courts by this count. We contracted to handle 75 different courts last year. And I would say that's evidence of our staffing challenges, because in a perfect world, if we're adequately funded and adequately staffed, we have a full-time dedicated public servant representing all of the non-conflict cases in a docket. And so those are 75 courts that we were unable to do that, and we had to go outside the full-time public defender system to get coverage for our clients. We've had substantial turnover in recent years, and I've got a slide in a little bit that shows that. But this is a list of our incoming class. When I created this slide, I mistakenly was thinking of the 24-25 years, so this is not the class of 25, this is the class of 24. Lots of attorneys coming in. You can see the mixture of law schools there. That's about half in-state and half out-of-state. Because of the number of vacancies we've had, we have to recruit aggressively out-of-state, and I'm going to talk about that as one of our requests in a little bit. I will say when I talk about recruiting out of state, I recognize sometimes there's some nervousness, like, hey, we've got good old law graduates right here at Chase and at Louisville and UK. We shouldn't be going to Wisconsin and not recruiting in state. Let me assure you, we are recruiting every single person that's willing to listen to us in the state of Kentucky. This year, we have about 35 in-state recruits. That's as many as we can get. And I will state this to you unequivocally. There is not a single graduating law student in Kentucky who wanted a job with DPA that we turned down because we were hiring someone out of state. We've hired everybody in state, and then we have to still go out of state because our 3 law schools produce a fair number. But when you filter that by those willing to work for what we can pay and do the difficult challenges of being a public defender, it's just we can't fill all our vacancies with that. But this is an outstanding class. This is not looking around at who we can beg to take a job. The benefit of recruiting nationally is you wind up with people that are dedicated to public defense, that want to come take advantage of the system that you have created as a legislature that is a model for the country. But I will say, while many are coming, and that I'm excited about everybody on that last slide that's coming, we do have one that's going that I want to honor this morning. Scott West has announced that he'll be retiring after 26 years with DPA for the last decade. He's been with me in Frankfort helping out our legislative work, in addition to being an outstanding trainer. Many of you may have seen him at Kentucky Law Updates for the Kentucky Bar Association. He is an outstanding trainer. He's given his career to our clients and to serving you through this legislative work and serving you throughout the Commonwealth. So I want to recognize Scott West for his outstanding work with DPA as he approaches retirement.
Thank you, Damon.
I want to talk about our alternative sentencing worker program. This got some attention in the last session in budget discussions, and we wound up with a good outcome from that, where Senate Bill 71 passed and created some expectations for the ASW program that I think are very positive. But our alternative sentencing worker program, again, is a nationally recognized program. We were pioneers in this area when it was created back in 2006, and we continue to be groundbreaking in this when it comes to having people, most with a social work background, but not exclusively, within the attorney-client relationship, having a relationship with individuals who have mental health needs and substance abuse needs. And so we have over 50 of these ASWs around the state doing outstanding work. Some of you heard from judges, even some prosecutors in the session, about the value. So I want to recognize Dawn Gasser is here today. Dawn is back there. Dawn is our program supervisor for our alternative sentencing worker program. She herself was a ASW for us in Cynthiana. And if any of you have questions about the program, Dawn would love to talk to you and tell you about the great benefits of the program. I asked Dawn to give me one quick story, and here's what she told me. She told me about a client that we had in one of our Central Kentucky offices, and the female client had significant substance abuse issues, needed treatment, and went to the Edgewater Recovery Center, which I think is over in Moorhead, and graduated that program and addressed her needs, and came out, was complying, had a family, and was being supportive, complying with all the orders, but then had a family tragedy. The trauma disrupted life, and she relapsed and went back into substance abuse problems. And when she did, and she woke up and realized, I need help, she didn't call her probation officer. She didn't call law enforcement. She didn't show up at the emergency room. She called the DPA ASW, who had worked with her at Edgewater, and said, you helped me before. Can you help me again? And our ASW got her a bed at Chrysalis House. She was pregnant at the time, so there were medical concerns in addition to her physical well-being herself. And so she went to Chrysalis House, and she graduated from Chrysalis House, completed that program, had a healthy child, and was able to get back on her feet and address her needs and become a productive citizen. And then she went back to Edgewater, but on the other side of the table. Edgewater hired her to be on staff because of the success she had had in treatment, and they wanted her to inspire other people who think they can't get out of their problems, but she was proof that she could. And our ASW was there at every step of the program and maintains to this day a relationship with that client. That's the power of our ASW program, and they're continuing to do great work for DPA and for our clients. Another issue that's come before, 2 years ago, the legislature passed a bill to require DPA to take over services in Louisville. So I'm happy to announce that on of this year, the DPA Louisville office opened in the same location as the prior nonprofit Louisville Public Defender's Office. I'll recognize Amy Hanna, who is here in the back of the room. Amy Hanna is our new manager of the DPA trial branch. We have divided that into multiple work units there because of the size, but Amy is the overall head of the entire branch of DPA. That transition went more smoothly than I could have even imagined. I realize I'm polled from Representative Nemus, but Representative Nemus has been very supportive throughout this process, and it went very smoothly. Most of the employees of the prior office came to DPA, not all, but we were able to have interaction and present what DPA could do for those employees, and those who chose to go elsewhere had plenty of notice and were able to find other opportunities. But most came to us. I think it was about 90 employees ended up coming to us. And then we've added to those 90 employees on that prior chart. If you counted them up, there's about 25 of those new attorneys that are going to Louisville. And so they had about 30 vacancies, and we filled 25 of them. We're working to fill the rest. And so it's been an overall success. And if anybody wants to talk about the Louisville office and specifics there, Amy would be happy to talk with you, or I'd be happy to talk with you as well. Let me talk about some challenges from this time. This is not A&R. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the numbers, but it's important that I communicate the challenges that are being raised by the funding decisions in this year's budget. and that's specifically defense versus prosecution. So the unified prosecutorial system was funded for FY25 at $164.5 million. We were funded at 103. Works out to about a 60%. It's easy math since we're close to 100 million. It's about 60% higher funding for prosecutors. The following 3 slides are things I presented at our conference. Well, this shows about 60% it's been fairly consistent, but you can see we are now at the high water mark for the amount of funding given to commonwealths and county attorneys. Now, keep in mind, this is not the Attorney General's office, which does much more than criminal, but they do criminal. That's not included here. This is all DPA funding, which includes appeals and other parts of DPA that commonwealths and county attorneys don't do. So this is not, it doesn't even tell the full story. But if you just look at commonwealths and county attorneys, they're funded at over 60% higher than DPA. We do, it's been a few years since we did a calculation, but in 2017 we looked at it. We do about 75% of the circuit court cases, about 50% of the criminal district court cases. And as you go up in complexity, our percentage goes up. We do almost every death penalty case. We do almost every A felony, particularly when you get away from the urban areas. We're doing almost all of those cases. And so these 3 slides are things I showed to our people to show how good Scott and I were at advocating. Because we asked for $2 million for recruitment, and you gave $2 million for recruitment to the Attorney General's office. We asked for $3 million in additional positions, and you gave $6 million in additional positions to county and commonwealth's attorneys. And we asked for about $5 million for salary increases, and you gave about $11 million for salary increases to prosecutors. We got no funding for any of those 3 purposes: no additional positions, no salary increases, no money for recruiting. And so what the impact of this is that turnover is now going back up. In the last month, I've lost 6 public defenders to prosecutors' offices. Because when you give prosecutors new positions and money to pay higher salaries, it's predictable what happens. They look across the courtroom and they say, hey, that looks like a good lawyer over there. They've gone through DPA's nationally recognized training. They're beating me on motions. How about I just take them into my office? And that's what happens. And so I've lost 6 in the last month. I believe prosecutors are just starting to roll out those new positions, so I expect that to increase. But already turnover since the huge spike, post-COVID spike, now it's trending back up again, and we're going to lose about 20% this year. Well, we're on track to lose 20% now, and my prediction is it'll go a little higher. Legislation from this year, this is something I include because I've included it every year that I've done this. This is about my 10th year of creating a criminal law scorecard. I used to do this and make a big fanfare. Now I'm going to go through this very quickly because I realize there are people in this building that see this and say that's exactly what we should be doing. But I want you to recognize the numbers, that you enacted 56 criminal laws that either created new crimes, expanded existing crimes, or increased the punishment on new crimes. And only 5 situations did you go the other direction. And I'll say I am somebody who is scrupulously literal. And so when I create this, I want to be completely honest. And so if this is small, I can give you a printout of this. But the kinds of narrowing of existing crimes is that you now can fish on your own land without being charged. You can street race, a county can authorize street racing. Those are the only things that have been done that narrow the criminal law. Anything in the work that we do is gone the other way. And I say this morning not to be critical, though we could have a debate on the merits of it, but just to point out that for the public defender system, this raises challenges. And so, Scott, you want to talk a little bit about what kind of challenge that is?
Time will tell what the overall impact of House Bill 5 is when it comes to incarceration rates, the crime rate, the overall safety of Kentuckians. We'll see that over a long period of time. But I want to talk about the immediate impact that House Bill 5 has on public defenders, and that has to do with the amount of time we have to spend on cases. There's a few new crimes created by House Bill 5. Carjacking comes to mind, fentanyl homicide. But the bulk of House Bill 5 is taking existing crimes, lengthening the sentences, and in many cases making them from nonviolent to violent. Just to give an example, wanton endangerment with the discharge of a firearm goes from a Class D, 1 to 5 years, to a Class C, 5 to 10 years. And it becomes violent. So that means several things. Normally, an offer before House Bill 5 on a wanton endangerment involving a discharge of a firearm might be 1 to 2 years. And it would possibly be probatable. And if you didn't get probated, you were 20% pro-eligible. Now that same crime is going to be 5 to 10 years. And if your offer is 5 or 6 years, that's going to be real time because it's 85% time. And you're not going to be probated. So the client expects and deserves to see the case being lawyered. They want to see the lawyer that is appointed to them be the Sixth Amendment lawyer that is guaranteed by the Constitution and see them working for them. Whereas they might have taken 1 year knowing that it's just a short period of time before they get out, to take 5 or 6 years, which can be a tenth of your life, they want to see the work done. And we're going to rise to the occasion. But that means we're going to spend more time on that and a lot of other crimes, which means we need more lawyers. You know, being a public defender is not for the faint of heart or the weak in spirit. It's hard to represent people up there in front of people with the community watching. And you're the one person on their side, and you've got to be on their side. You can't just pay lip service. You got to be their lawyer. And we're going to need more of those. The more crimes that are created, the more sentences that are lengthened, the more crimes that that go from nonviolent to violent. You need more of us doing this, and that requires more lawyers and more pay.
Last thing I want to talk about as far as developments that have happened this year, and you may or may not be aware of this, but an order came out of the Franklin Circuit Court that didn't explicitly lift the injunction on executions in Kentucky, but it was a definite step towards what's likely to be an eventual lifting of the injunction. For the last over a decade, about 13 years now, the Department of Corrections has been enjoined from executing anyone, and the Attorney General has been enjoined from seeking a death warrant. This case of Bays versus Corrections is one of the steps in undoing that injunction. So I think it's likely within the next year or so that may be lifted. Now, whether or not that's good public policy, we can have a discussion on another day. But again, my focus today is on the impact this will have on the department if that happens. There are numerous individuals on death row. There are 25 individuals on death row as of today. There are a number of them that are at the final stages that if the injunction is lifted, it's not unreasonable to think there could be 5 or 6 executions in the first year after that. And executions, if they occur, are an enormous drain on DPA resources because of everything we have to do. Again, like Scott just said, the things the client deserves and are entitled to under the law before that final moment when the sentence is carried out. And so if this happens, this is something that is going to be a huge burden on DPA and other parts of the system. I'm only presenting about DPA, but it's going to be a huge burden on all parts of the system. I will say, not necessarily in the aftermath of House Bill 5, but I will simply say from a public policy standpoint, I know I'm polled behind one, but I know I'm looking at some people that have advocated in the past for abolition of the death penalty. If that were going to happen, this is the time to have that discussion before the mechanics of executing individuals kicks back up. If nothing's done, all the machinery is in place to carry it out. But this would be the time for that discussion if that discussion is something that this body's interested in. Now let me just end with some new things that are challenges that maybe you haven't heard about if you're a criminal defense lawyer and you've tried to visit a client in a jail or prison. You may have faced some of the issues I'm talking about, but we are facing a significant increase in complications in just talking to our clients and just doing our job, mostly through the current practices of the Department of Corrections facilities. Now, I'll say at the beginning, and I'll probably say again in 2 minutes at the end of this chapter, I'm working with the Secretary of the Justice Public Safety Cabinet. We're in the Justice Cabinet, so I have a good relationship with Secretary Jackson. We're working with them to try to work through this. but there are legitimate issues related to our communication with and our ability to visit our clients. The first is what our attorneys have to go through just to do their job. Our attorneys are invasively searched. This is not just go through a metal detector. These are aggressive frisks that are being done on our lawyers who just show up just trying to do their job of talking to their client. No suspicion that they have contraband on them, no reason to go above what would be usual, but the usual in some facilities is an aggressive search. This is more in jails than prisons. In prisons, the policy is a full body scan. Now, let me start with the search. In one jail in Kentucky, a female leader of DPA who has been a public defender for years, in the last month, visited a jail and in front of male clients and male jail personnel was aggressively frisked. Underwear manipulated, hands in all parts of the body, up and down legs, front. Nothing was found. There was no suspicion, particularized suspicion. When she questioned it, they said, well, we do that for everybody. We've since learned they don't do it for everybody, but they did it to her. She's retained a lawyer and probably is going to have some legal action over that. Our lawyers shouldn't have to face that just to do their job. We're human beings. We employ 700 people. Some of them are going to make bad choices, and when they do, they'll be held accountable. But we should not be suspected up front if there's no particularized reason for suspicion, and we shouldn't be treated as if we're being admitted to the jail when we just want to sit and have a conversation. As to the body scanners, when we have conversations about this, people say, well, you do that to get on a flight. I don't have time to talk about all the distinctions between the way that TSA carries out a body scan and the way that it's done by a random employee of the Department of Corrections. But it is not the same. It's not same gender. It is not separate rooms. You have someone with a different gender making eye contact with you and looking at the body scan, which is very revealing. We've had people asked about knee surgery. We've had women asked about feminine hygiene products. That should not happen when our people are just trying to do their job. There are also policies. Well, I'll go on to this. So corrections says that there are 3 confidential ways that we can communicate with clients. So when they can do an in-person visit and go through what I just talked about, they can have a confidential unrecorded telephone call or an uncensored legal mail. There is currently not a single method that is reliably confidential for DPA lawyers, and I'll go through these very quickly. The in-person visits, even if you go through all the security mechanisms to get in there, the current DOC policy is that a DOC staffer is in the room where they can hear the conversation between the attorney and client. They'll say it's security, but we're asking, get behind the window, stand back, watch us. We want to be safe, but they are there where they can hear. We have one of our attorneys who was having a casual conversation with their client, trying to gain some trust, told them a joke in a private conversation. The guard laughed. That should not be happening in a private attorney-client meeting. Just last week, I was notified of one of our post-conviction lawyers in a complicated case visiting a client. And they told him when he went in, he had his file. It's a big, thick file, much thicker than this. And the DOC employee said, for you to see your client, I've got to copy your file. Now, I hope every attorney here's ears went up. And our attorney said, you ain't copying my file. I'm not giving you my file to walk to some copier in another room and copy it. So they had a discussion over that, and the person said, okay, I won't copy your file, but you're limited to 50 pages. In this case, they had just filed a motion that was 70 pages long. So 50 pages seemed like an unreasonable restriction, but our attorney went along with that and said, okay, I'll take 50 pages. Took 50 pages. Here's the kicker. The DOC employee then walked him to a room where he was physically separated by glass from his client. If he had had a ball of fentanyl that he wanted to give his client, he couldn't have gotten it to him. But these rules were imposed on him, even though he had no physical interaction with his client and was talking through glass. We're facing those policies right now. As to unrecorded telephone calls, there are prisons that aren't even doing telephone calls anymore because there are tablets, and you may have seen in the news, there have been some news stories about these correctional tablets in the last couple of days. The tablets exist, and facilities are telling us, we're not going to set up a private attorney-client phone call anymore. They can call you on their tablet. The problem with that is, when I call you on my tablet, my cellmate's sitting right here, and I can't have a conversation, because if I have a conversation about my case, he's trying to find information he can use to help his case. It is not a confidential setting. Finally, uncensored legal mail. We had to file a lawsuit against Department of Corrections. We've resolved that lawsuit because they copy our mail. If an attorney sends a letter to a client on a private, confidential matter, it was copied. The feeling, just full disclosure, the feeling is that that's an anti-fentanyl, that there are people that send mail to the prison and they soak it in fentanyl, where you then basically eat the paper for the drugs. And so by copying, you give a copy. I get the policy when it comes from a girlfriend or a brother. When it comes from the lawyer, that should not be done. Again, in the absence of a reason for suspicion. So we've litigated that. There's now a bundlesome process we go through. But the mail is still opened by a security guard who leafs through the mail before handing it to a client, even when it's private confidential. So these are challenges we're facing. We don't know what to ask you for here, because I don't know what can be done through law. Again, I'm working with Secretary Jackson. But if any of you would like to work with us to try to come up with a legislative solution to this, to guarantee confidential attorney-client communication, I'd love to have that conversation with you. Finally, the last part of the list, this may seem petty, but when I'm talking about our budget and I see the corrections budget of $800 million, there's a little cost transfer that goes through here, because when they don't set up telephone calls and they have to use the tablet, that's on us. We have to pay to talk to our clients. And it's not a huge expense, but it just seems DPA used to not have to pay to talk to our clients. Now we do. So that's a cost transfer through the department. Last thing I'm going to talk about on this, our virtual court. And so, Scott, you want to talk about virtual court?
That's during the COVID year, we got comfortable and proficient at virtual court. It was a national emergency. We had to make some compromises in how we did everything in life. We had video church. We had video school. We had telehealth. We had a lot of things that we don't have now, because when the emergency went away, so did these emergency measures. But one remnant that has stayed is there was a whole lot of savings that was experienced by the people who transport prisoners from jails or prisons to court. There's been movement to keep that as much as possible in the court system. But what I want to say is it's not a cost savings now. It is a cost transfer, because when when our clients are not brought to court, that means we've got to go to them first. And sometimes that can be a big travel. I remember one day I had in Callaway, I had 3 people, one from Green River, one from Eddyville, and one from Christian County Jail. And they were all into the courthouse at one time. I was able to talk with them, do paperwork, and in one of those instances, resolve the case. Because that's the other thing that you miss when you don't have a live presence. Often in court, the victim is there, the police is there, the prosecutor's there, the defense attorney's there, the defendant's family is there. And if the defendant is there, sometimes what was going to be just a pretrial conference becomes an opportunity to settle the case, because negotiation is a dynamic. And when there are people in court, when you have that next to your client discussion, where you don't have to go into a video chat room, which may or may not work, and have a private conversation, you get to have those conversations that lead to getting the case resolved. Just like in every other walk of life, in-person representation by your lawyer is better than virtual representation, which it's starting to happen more. We think there's a lot of good places that can be used, but I urge you all, please be cautious in expanding this up into all phases of criminal law. The defense needs to be able to have the right to insist on an in-person court when it's necessary. And I assure you, when it's not necessary, I'm one of the first to say, put them on the video and let's move on. But we need to be able to have the right to insist in our clients being present by our side while we're representing them.
All right, let me end with just three quick things. This is a chart I've used before, but just a reminder, many of us have grown up, and for most of our life, there have been jokes about how many lawyers there are. That is not true anymore. We can still make the jokes, but in reality, it's not true anymore. Law school enrollment is down significantly, and as I said earlier, the number of people who are willing to work, to do the stress and pay of being a public defender is even a smaller subset of the graduating class. So our challenges are compounded by the fact that there are less law graduates to choose from. And so one of the specific things we've asked, and this is something we asked for last year, it was given, a version of this was given to the Attorney General, but we need some money for recruiting, but we also need some authority. I talked about this last year for those of you that were here, just to remind you that after someone graduates law school, there are a lot of expenses. And when we're recruiting nationally, every year we lose a number of people that tell us, honestly, if I could get to my first paycheck, I'd come work for you. But I can't pay for the bar prep. I can't pay for the bar exam. I can't move from my state to your state. I can't find a place to live and then go an entire month as a state employee before I get that first paycheck. And then pay for what you can offer, which our current starting salary is $57,000. So if we had some authority to do grants to people, we'll pay for your moving expenses in exchange for you staying with us 2 years or 3 years. We would set a certain amount that we would then recoup if they don't meet their commitment. That's what I need. But that can't be done right now. I can't pay for somebody to move from Oklahoma to here. And I picked that. That's not random. We had someone for the University of Oklahoma that ended up not coming because of this. And so this is one request we have. This could be done in an off year. This isn't necessarily part of an appropriation bill. Now, giving us money would be, but the authority that I'm asking isn't necessarily there, because if you just give me the ability to use my own budget, then they go hand in hand. The more vacancies I have, the more I need it, but the more money I have. They go hand in hand. If we're fully staffed, I'm spending all my budget, but then I don't need this authority. So it goes together. We need more positions, and this is funding, so this may have to wait another year till the budget cycle, but Scott's talked well about it, and we are a streamlined agency right now. We have, it's basically a math calculation, similar to what the formula that the CASA representative talked about. We have a formula as well, and we put the attorneys in offices that are needed to have a caseload as close to the standards as we can get. We actually need an extra attorney or two in every office, because that would help us handle these other dockets. When a jury trial comes, it doesn't drain the office. And most importantly, when somebody resigns, we don't have to scramble to sign a contract or something to get somebody to cover that docket. So I would like us to be funded, and I believe that the system would work much better if we were funded with at least one additional position in each office. And finally, we've talked to some of you about this in the past. It came up a little bit in the budget discussions this year. DPA provides representation in a lot of places that are kind of quasi-criminal. All of these, there is at least a statutory and in some situations a constitutional right to counsel. But it doesn't necessarily have to be DPA. And so we are open to certain categories of cases, and I list them here: 202A, Tim's Law, Casey's Law, child support contempt, and fair team. All of those we are currently handling, which means people are leaving district court or circuit court to go handle these cases. They could be handled by private attorneys. But here's the key. It can't be handled by private attorneys cheaper if it comes out of our budget. The most efficient way of doing it is to adequately staff our offices, and then we can handle them. And so if we've got to pay for contracts, it's not a savings. We often have conversations with people who say, well, wouldn't it be cheaper to contract with a private attorney, because then you're not paying for health insurance, you don't have to give them a computer in an office. And that sounds good, but the efficiency that comes with full-time defense overrides that. Because our people are there on Monday and they can be there on Tuesday. When we contract with a private attorney, we're contracting for a finite period of time. If it's two hours on Thursday morning, they negotiate 2 hours on Thursday morning. And if there's a hearing on Wednesday afternoon we need, they're not covering it because it's not in the contract. If I have an employee, they do both. So the efficiencies of the full-time system override it. But if you're looking to help us at a time that there aren't a lot of lawyers willing to take our jobs, this would be a way to give us some caseload relief, but it can't come with financial cut as well. In other words, fund these like a GAL that Chair Elliott does. Fund those through some other mechanism. Let us keep our budget and focus on the criminal cases. All right, that brings me to the end of the presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions. We are making a difference in your community, and I hope you're seeing that.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I always appreciate your candid nature with us here. You've convinced me. I think that was my bill to provide recruitment and retention. So you've convinced me of that. I know that's something that you presented on. And as you pointed out, the Sixth Amendment right to counsel is guaranteed to any criminal defendant,
Yes.
regardless of their ability to pay. And so we have to have a strong system, or we don't have our American legal system as we know it if we don't adequately provide for our public defenders. So I appreciate the candid nature of your discussion. We do have some questions. Senator Berg.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. So my question is actually sort of in two parts to answer it. In other states, do they fund their prosecutors and their defense attorneys basically at the same level to sort of equalize the system? Or is it possible, because part of what I'm thinking is maybe our prosecutors have jobs that our defense people aren't working on, and that accounts for the discrepancy in funding? Or what is it? Because, I mean, if you want an equal system where everybody, has a chance for defense, you would think they should be funded equally. So what causes that discrepancy? Why is it there? And are there elements I'm not aware of that cause that? And how do other states handle that?
Senator Berg, a great question. So we've never advocated for equal because of exactly what you say. They handle every case that comes through the door. We do not. We handle every case that comes to us. But the current discrepancy between their funding and our funding is much greater than the discrepancy in the workload. Particularly if you go into Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, you count the number of indictments, you look at their staff, you look at our staff that's handling that court. Our people are handling more cases than each prosecutor is handling because they have more people due to a greater staff. So that's my point, is that the discrepancy shouldn't be that large. There are locations. There's in Tennessee is one. There's a state statute. It's complicated, but it's the simple version is it requires every additional dollar that goes to a prosecutor to be matched with 75 cents to the public defender. They came up with that formula. So that's something that Tennessee does. They have a different kind of system than us, so it's not quite that. They don't have 75% of the funding, but they do have a statutory, every additional dollar goes 75. There are states like Washington, which is the politics of Washington are not the politics of Kentucky, but it is much closer to equal funding there. And the rationale is, even if you don't get 100% of the cases, you've got the person who's going to prison, and so you're the job, and you don't have law enforcement. You don't have the other things that wrap around the prosecutor services that aren't in the prosecutor's budget. Defense attorney, we are everything. We're the investigator, we're the social workers, we're everything. And so that's the rationale between closer to equal. But I've never asked for equal. I think most states have some discrepancy, and I have not done a study to know whether 62% is representative, higher or lower. I don't know that.
A follow-up, please.
We're going to have to move on. Unfortunately, we have two other presentations in about an hour to do that. So I do appreciate your time. I want to thank Deputy West for his service, and now you won't have to suffer through any more meetings with me after you retire. So that's one benefit of that. I do want to say that with regard to the discussion of the death penalty, I just want to say I support the death penalty. I agree with the governor So you and I just have a policy disagreement there. I think it's used very sparingly, but there are cases where I think it's necessary. So I'm a strong supporter of the death penalty. I think it's a necessary element of our system. So I do want to make that point. But thank you very much for your presentation. And
Thank you,
you're
Mr.
always
Chairman.
welcome.
Thank you.
In my office,
Thank you.
May I?
Senator Westfield.
I wish I was coming back because I'd file a bill to do it all. I appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate the work that your people do. And let me just say, I wish that 12 years ago, Whitney had the same attitude that I have today, because maybe I could have made more of a difference 12 years ago. So I'm thankful for what you're doing. And Scott, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I'm grateful for both of you professionally and personally. And I appreciate your candor, as the chairman said this morning, laying out pretty plain what the needs are and what you're facing if things don't change. So I just wanted to say my thanks, and thank you again, Scott.
It's been a pleasure working with all of you. I found this work very rewarding, and everyone I've talked with has talked with me with a high amount of integrity and honesty, and I've appreciated that.
Thank you very much. Our next presentation is fines and fees imposed by state and local governments, and that's Representative Decker. If you would proceed to the table and introduce yourself. And
I thought there was a plug. I hope my battery doesn't die. I thought there was a plug up here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you can proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Elliott and Co-Chair Westerfield and members of this committee. Thank you for allowing me to be here today to present this topic of a bill I'm working on and that I plan to introduce during the 2025 session. I filed House Bill 820, which was co-sponsored by Representative Dietz and Representative Mosier. Specifically, that bill and this bill would create a statewide database and searchable public website that would include information for each civil and criminal fine and fee assessed to an individual, either by a state court, local court, or agency. Before the bill is filed this year, however, I intend to amend it in certain ways because of things I've learned in the interim. And I have already corroborated with AOC, the Administrative Office of the Court, and found that they have no objection to requiring this type of statewide reporting of court fines and fees. In fact, I don't want to speak for Katie Comstock, but I understand from her that the courts in Kentucky already report this data to AOC, who could then just simply submit it to LRC, which the bill will task with creating the website and maintaining the database. Today, you will hear from several people whom I have collaborated with. Each of them will introduce themselves. I have also reached out to CACO and the Kentucky League of Cities to work with me to ensure that I understand their thoughts and possible concerns about the bill. I also intend to collaborate with the DOJ and DOC to get their input on the bill before it's filed. Damon Preston, whom we just heard from today, agreed to meet with me and advise me of his thoughts about this compilation and the topic of fines and fees. I have already spoken with various judges and attorneys about the bill. In fact, today one judge, District Court Judge Stephanie Burke, has signed up to give testimony here. I've consulted with my jailer and sheriff about what I am attempting to accomplish with this bill, and both support it. In addition, both have agreed to meet with me and their state associations to discuss the bill. Before this bill is finalized, I will also coordinate with many people, as many as I can talk to, who have been affected by fines and fees in our system. Today, Elena Sweezy agreed to meet with me and to bring some of her clients whom she is assisting with reentry after their release from incarceration to help me better understand how they have been affected, to ensure that this bill would cover the types of information we need to gather to understand their concerns. Senator Webb has also agreed to work with me on the bill. Last year, while I filed the first draft of the bill, I also met with the NAACP about that bill, and they later wrote a very encouraging message to me saying, among other things, we fully support your efforts to collect data on fines and fees in Kentucky. At this point, I'm here simply to advise you of this topic so you can begin thinking about it. I invite each of you to let me know your thoughts and any concerns you have about the topic or the proposal to mandate the creation of a database and a public website. I became interested in filing this bill because I have seen how devastating fines and fees for certain traffic violations can be. I am the executive director of a Christian nonprofit organization that, among other things, offers shelter to women and children who are homeless. Over the course of the past 9 years, I have worked with women who simply cannot get back on their feet because of the fines and fees that have been associated with driving offenses. Quite a few sought shelter with us after losing their driver's license because they failed to renew their tags on their car and failed to pay the ticket. And then I talked to one lady, actually she's not sheltered with us, but I talked to her at a conference I went to, who actually went to jail on a bench warrant for not having paid her court costs and not appeared in court, not paid the fine. She had children with her who were taken from her then, and she lost custody of over, again, a traffic violation. In at least 26 states, including Kentucky, non-payment of certain fines and fees will result in the mandatory driver's license revocation. It can be harder for individuals to meet any financial obligations they have in their lives when they are unable to drive to work. A problem compounded in rural areas like mine, where there is no public transportation or any existing transportation service. According to the National Center for State Courts, one study in New Jersey found that almost 45% of suspended drivers lost their jobs after their license was suspended, and the same number of drivers who lost their jobs could not find other employment while their license was suspended. Since most suspensions for non-payment end only when the suspended driver pays the full amount of the fine, late fees and interest simply compound, and a person can easily remain in debt indefinitely. And if a suspended driver continues to drive to work or school, this can lead to the criminal sanctions I mentioned and incarceration. In 2023, the American Bar Association issued a report stating people all across the country are regularly incarcerated because they owe court debts stemming from a conviction, a traffic ticket, or some municipal infraction that they simply cannot afford to pay. Because our shelter program is designed to help our residents move from homelessness to financial self-reliance, each resident is required to get a job and to create and follow a budget. With the goal of saving money, we open savings accounts for our residents. As you can imagine, if one of our ladies is saddled with debt of any kind, it's harder for her to become financially self-reliant, especially if she cannot drive to work. In each case I have seen where traffic-related fines and fees have caused our residents not to be able to drive, each resident has wanted to pay off her debt, but just has simply been unable to do so due to her lack of income or assets. In addition, a few years ago, I talked with one of our residents who was distraught because she was unable to help her son pay his post-incarceration fees. Because her son was having trouble landing a job after being released from jail, And because our sheltered residents did not have funds to help, her son was going to be sent back to jail for non-payment of his parole officer's fees. Because of these encounters through my work, I decided to attend an NCL conference during the 2023 interim that focused on the need for each state to review and perhaps reform the fines and fees imposed by courts and state agencies. It was at that conference that I became convicted of the need for this type of bill that I plan to file. Senator Webb attended that conference, as did Co-Chair Westerfield. One of the persons who has offered input on this bill is Kaylee Raymer, a policy analyst from the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. In 2023, she published a report in which she said that criminal fines and fees drive up incarceration and push Kentuckians deeper into poverty. As a lawmaker, I want to ensure that that we have legislation that it gathers sufficient information to analyze whether these claims are true, and that whether we have excessive fines, whether we have fines and fees that particularly damage low-income individuals who simply cannot pay them. Constitutionally speaking, debtors' prisons have been illegal for nearly 200 years. Congress abolished debtors' prisons in 1833, and despite that, state judges continue to send people to jail for failing to pay court debts. This issue reached the Supreme Court in 1970s with 2 cases that found it unconstitutional to incarcerate people solely because they could not pay. Another case that same year, or the next year, Tate versus Short. The first was Williams versus Illinois in 1970. In 1971, Tate versus Short found that you could not prohibit. You should prohibit probation revocation for non-payment without a further finding that the person had the means to pay and refused to do so. And yet, according to the American Bar Association, people go to jail every day across our country for failing to pay the cost. One way the courts justify this is by claiming it is for contempt of court, as I mentioned, for not appearing in court. For probation, that was a court order to pay, and so they will imprison for contempt of court, when really the underlying problem is there cannot be payment. So unless we create a statewide database and searchable public website that includes information about the civil and criminal fees and fines assessed in Kentucky, as my bill will do, unless we know how much is charged in civil and criminal fines and fees and by whom, if we need to know how much is collected and the cost of that collection. We cannot ensure the transparency we all want in our government unless we ask for this information. So I want to ensure you that our fines and fees bill is not changing any fine and fee in it. We are simply, we're not proposing any changes. You have heard that I'm concerned about how this affects low-income people, but until I see the evidence, until the General Assembly has enough information to ensure sound public policy, I think that is why we need the bill. States all over the country are passing this kind of bill, and I hope all of you will support Kentucky doing so as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Decker, and thank you all for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Alistair Whitney. I am Legislative Counsel at the Institute for Justice. IJ is a nonprofit public interest law firm that works in both state houses and courthouses around the country to protect civil liberties. And as part of our work, we encourage state governments to study the effects of court-imposed debt, fines, and fees so that legislators and citizens have a clear understanding and transparent understanding of how court-imposed debt affects individuals' property rights and Eighth Amendment right to be free from excessive fines and fees. So, as Representative Decker said, IJ strongly encourages the committee to consider ways to improve the Commonwealth's reporting of court-imposed fees and fines and provide a centralized database that transparently shows the extent to which these financial burdens affect everyday Kentuckians. So what does the reporting bill do? It creates a single, like as I said, a single centralized database and a portal for accessing and interpreting both state and countywide fines and fees related data. Now, Kentucky does have some good information that it reports on fines and fees at the county level, but unfortunately this data is in the aggregate, so we are unsure about as Representative Decker said, about who is affected specifically by these fines and fees. Having access to this information is important because research shows that in many jurisdictions, court-imposed debt can balloon to sums that far exceed the initial charges imposed, severely hamper the ability of Kentuckians to discharge that debt, disproportionately punish low-income individuals and folks from marginalized communities, and can be costly for state governments to collect. Indeed, in many cases, the court-imposed debt is never collected. And this leaves, of course, individuals saddled with costly and ballooning debts for life in some cases. It's also worth noting that in some jurisdictions, fines and fees can actually cost more to collect. So the state is losing money trying to collect these fines and fees. Kentucky would not be alone in passing legislation to understand the extent of how court-related debt affects individuals. Many states, including Texas and Florida, require local authorities to provide this detailed information on how circuit courts impose these fines and fees. Illinois, which is also a unified court system similar to Kentucky's, for a time also had this requirement that municipal courts were to report more detailed information on court-related debt and the imposition of fines and fees. While these states and a few others have taken positive steps to improve transparency, more can be done in those states and also in Kentucky. So Representative Decker's bill that she introduced last session, HB 820, would not only provide this General Assembly with the ability to monitor cases, the cases in which fines and fees are imposed, but it would also show whether such charges are excessive and or are being used primarily to fund essential government functions, including the operation of the criminal justice system. If this General Assembly passes a version of this bill next session, Kentucky would be a nationwide leader in fines and fees reporting transparency, and it would equip all of you with the information to understand how this affects folks in the state and whether it serves the interests of the criminal justice system to continue imposing the fines and fees that the state imposes on individuals. I want to echo what Representative Decker just said. To be very clear, this is simply a reporting bill. This does not eliminate or change or alter fundamentally how fines and fees are imposed. It does not eliminate certain fines or fees. Instead, it is simply a vehicle for understanding the impact of these charges on Kentuckians, and it would lend transparency to how these charges are imposed, providing you with the data to determine whether or not more substantial changes are required.
We're gonna have to move on, unfortunately, but I appreciate your comments. Senator Webb.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, I'm here sort of counsel, in an of counsel capacity, and certainly to lend my support. But and most of you all know me. Some of you may not know. I've been doing this for 38 years, primarily a criminal defense lawyer in Southeast and Northeast Kentucky. I've been an officer of the Kentucky Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I've been a section chair of the criminal law section of the bar, and contract public defender. And we've heard some today about transferred costs. And I think that the fiscal side of me, which I've devoted a big part of my tenure here to, also merits, I think it's responsible budgeting to see how these costs are being transferred and the impact on certain demographics. And certainly, I've often called this issue, an individual gets on what I call the treadmill of injustice, and it's really hard for some individuals to get off. And I think before we can proceed with sound policy and have legitimate discussions from a budget standpoint, but we have to identify, and data is how we're going to do that. And I appreciate my colleague, Representative Decker, interested in this and bringing this and the work that Chairman Westerfield has done, and I think will continue to be there for us and we appreciate that. But just certainly, I'm here to answer any questions and to provide some level of a practitioner's perspective here.
Thank you very much. David Morgan, who's here with the Reason Foundation. Mr. Morgan, if you'd introduce yourself and be as brief as you can. Thank you. David.
Oh, there we go. David Morgan, Reason Foundation. Thank you for the opportunity. It's not really much more to add to what was said. Outside of this is a reporting bill. We believe the judicial system should be fully funded, but in order to make sure that we're doing the best job possible, you guys need to have the information at your disposal to be able to make that happen. That's why we wholeheartedly support the efforts of Representative Decker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Kate Bryan with the National Conference of State Legislatures, who is on.
Yes, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me and see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Proceed.
excellent. I'm going to share my screen, and I will do my best to move quickly through this. So good afternoon, Chairman Elliott, Chairman Westerfield, and members of the committee. My name is Kate Bryan. I'm a policy specialist with the National Conference of State Legislatures. I work on a myriad of issues related to criminal and civil justice, including re-entry and specifically legal financial obligations in the justice system. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with NCSL, I'll just give a quick high-level overview. We are nonpartisan, bipartisan. We work with lawmakers across the nation, as well as DC and the US territories. And one of our goals is to provide legislatures with information and research on policy issues and legislative tracking, both at the state and federal levels. Today, I've been asked to discuss state approaches to legal financial obligations. However, before I start, I would like to say that I will not be discussing restitution or victims funds, as that falls outside of the scope of today's presentation. And I would also like to emphasize that I am not here to endorse a position for or against legal financial obligations, but instead present some of the research as well as data that is currently available in this field. So what are legal financial obligations, or LFOs? These are collectively known as fines, fees, and surcharges. I will also be using the terms court debt as well as monetary sanctions throughout the presentation. Here on this slide, you see fines and fees. And to begin, I would like to differentiate between the two. Looking at fines, these are essentially monetary punishments. Some view fines not only as sanctions for offenders, but as a way to deter others from committing similar offenses. Fees, on the other hand, these are payments that individuals might have to make for things like court costs or the costs associated with community supervision, and we will look at both of those more closely. So with that said, cities, states, courts, district attorneys' offices, they can levy fines and fees against an individual at virtually any point along the criminal justice or civil justice continuum. So having this context, we can now look at some arguments in favor of LFOs as well as some arguments against LFOs. So when we are talking about arguments in favor of legal financial obligations, there are typically 3 points that are invoked. The first is that fines and fees are often used to finance court functions. This can be especially true in rural jurisdictions where there might be somewhat narrower margins in that state or county budget. The second, as mentioned earlier, they might serve as a deterrent for future offenses. And lastly, there are those that believe that taxpayers should not have to pay the penalties that result from somebody acting unlawfully. So now we'll look at the other side of the debate, arguments against monetary sanctions. Some take the position that LFOs are ineffective and potentially have the ability to do more harm than good. One perspective is that if monetary sanctions are used to fund the judiciary, for instance, that might incentivize the imposition of legal financial obligations. A second argument is that the amount an individual is often ordered to pay presents a pretty significant financial barrier or hurdle. And these LFOs often go unpaid or can result in that person making decisions that can have adverse outcomes down the road. So this might include skipping medical treatments or not making child support payments. Lastly, there's data, and we'll look at this more closely, linking LFOs to recidivism. In some instances, individuals are actually committing additional crimes to pay off existing court debt. So in sum, those advocating for fines and fees reform often will put forth the idea that the impartiality, fairness, the equity of the justice system could be called into question if punishment can be determined by financial status. So today we'll look at three things. The first, we'll examine how monetary sanctions are often applied in both the adult and the juvenile justice system. This will include things like court-related fees, incarceration-related fees, and community supervision fees. We'll also look at non-payment and some of the downstream effects or consequences. And when I reference downstream consequences and effects, these are going to slice both ways. I will put this in the context of both the individuals who are sanctioned as well as the institution that are imposing monetary sanctions. Lastly, we'll look at how states are re-examining legal financial obligations, and we'll look at some recent legislative examples. So to begin our look at LFOs in the justice system, we will start with court-related fees. These are things like filing fees, court reporter fees, there might be a jury fee. Fees of this nature are levied by both state and local courts. And notably, these fees are often not calculated or calibrated based on an individual's ability to pay. So whether you're making $30,000 a year or $300,000 a year, that filing fee for your case might very well be the same. I have an example here from North Carolina. As you can see, one might have to pay $183 for a case that enters the district court for a misdemeanor charge. And while I don't have it pictured here, if the case is filed in Superior Court, that individual might have to pay upwards of $300. These are some additional examples of fees that might be charged in a criminal court in North Carolina. You see the appointment of counsel fee, that's going to cost $75. If that case ends up going through the dispute resolution process, that individual might be charged $60 per mediation. So now we'll look at incarceration fees. These are basically monetary charges for room and board, as well as other services one might receive while in confinement. The term of art that's often used in this space is pay to stay. And you see here that the majority of states do have laws that allow a state or a county to assess fees against an individual who is incarcerated. I have an example here from Florida. Most county jails in Florida do assess a processing fee when an individual enters a jail. These fees do vary by county. So in Miami-Dade, an individual will be paying $25, while if that individual is booked in Orange County, that person will pay $6. This is an excerpt from the Orange County fee directory. You see that $6 booking fee. You will also notice a daily subsistence fee of $2.25, as well as some other charges such as costs. If that person is a potential candidate for community corrections, they will pay for that intake process. Much like the adult system, juveniles, as well as their family, are assessed costs when that young person is placed in a detention facility or other out-of-home placement. So here we see in Pickaway County, that's going to be $75 per day. Dane County, they used to charge $130 per night that young person was in out-of-home placement, but they actually did away with this fee in 2019. And just for some context, Dane County looked over a 2-year period. They found that they had $1.4 million in debt that was related to youth detention fees. And of that $1.4 million, they only collected $17,000 over that 2-year period.
I'm sorry to interject, but we have another presenter, and I would like for you to, we have your presentation in our committee materials, so if you could just summarize very briefly, that would be helpful to us as we're running against a 1 o'clock deadline where another committee is meeting, and I don't want to bleed over into that committee. So thank you.
Not a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead just to some points that have been made earlier. Representative Decker brought up debt-based driver's license suspensions. We are seeing states 25 states and the District of Columbia since 2017, they have passed legislation to either curb or eliminate that practice. We've also seen recently some sweeping as well as narrow reforms in the fines and fees space. Delaware passed legislation in 2022. There are many provisions. The key points are up here. And you'll notice that there was going to be a loss to their general fund to the tune of just under $1.2 million, but that was able to be offset by a one-time appropriation in 2023 and then a recurring appropriation to the Administrative Office of the Courts in the sum of $216,000. New Mexico also passed broad reforms in 2023. I have those listed here. House Bill 139 eliminated fees, but I do want to point out that it did not eliminate fines. It also gave the judiciary more discretion to waive some of these fees, and they also addressed debt-based driver's license by directing their state's DMV to reinstate any licenses that were suspended for non-payment. Other states are taking a bit more of a tailored approach. Nevada in 2023 passed legislation that prohibits the state's prisons from charging that individual that room and board fee, as well as medical co-pays. Oklahoma in 23 passed a bill where defendants can request a cost hearing. And then if that judge determines that that individual indeed cannot pay those monetary sanctions, that judge can waive those sanctions in part or in whole. We've seen a lot of movement as well in the juvenile justice space, comparatively more than we've seen in the adult space. Nearly 20 states have passed laws that limit or prohibit LFOs in the juvenile court systems. We saw 7 states pass laws in 2023. And the Department of Justice has weighed in and has taken the stance that youth in juvenile courts should be presumed indigent and thus unable to pay any legal financial obligations. So I'll go ahead and stop there so we can move on to the next presentation, but happy to take
very
any
much.
questions.
I appreciate it. We have your materials in our packets, and they're very informative. Judge Burke is here, and thank you for coming. And I know you have a unique perspective as you have to impose these fines and fees every day. So
thank you very much. It's very good to see you again, and I promise to be brief. From my seat, I believe that after 14 years on the bench, I can safely say that we all know that Kentucky is ranked the 6th poorest state in the country, and every day on the bench, I believe that to be absolutely true. And it is often very hard to watch after I've entered orders and see the result of those orders and having no legal recourse to really do anything different. I know I speak for the Kentucky District Judges Association as the president in saying that we would welcome this study and more data. The current system of collection of fines, cost, fees, restitution, all these monetary amounts often results in the repeat wasting of judicial, law enforcement, and correctional resources. We're spending at a much higher rate to collect monies that we will not get, and we're spending more than we're even trying to collect. And so that is not a good governmental decision. Our local governments are wasting monies. We're losing monies trying to collect these. As you know, the persons are regularly arrested on bench warrants for traffic violations and ultimately incarcerated, and those costs are, that they then work that off at a rate of $50 a day, which is set by statute, but we know that is more to incarcerate them per day. And so that is completely counterproductive. We're spending more to basically not get that money. You're not going to get that money. You're just going to spend money to punish them and for a offense that was not jailable to start with. And that is very difficult to do from my seat. And I believe that I speak for all judges when I say that. I think that we can do better and we can look at this and we can think of a smarter way to collect funds, because there are circumstances where people just don't pay. And we want to be able to delineate between those who can't pay and those who refuse to pay. And I mean, one idea would be, so who's good at collecting money? Well, the Kentucky Revenue Cabinet is good at collecting money when it's time to withhold money from your taxes. We know that other ways, there's other things such as child support, that you don't get your money from your tax return if you owe child support. They keep that. Maybe we could somehow shift these monies owed at some point in time to the Revenue Cabinet, and if people have money, they could keep that money. And we'd probably collect a lot more money that way than what we're doing, and we wouldn't be spending money on incarcerating these individuals, particularly the wrong ones. And so there's just lots of things that we could do that would be more effective and not as cruel. And so I would like to say that we encourage the study, and we would like to sit down with you and look at this as a whole and just hope that we can do this better.
Thank you very much. And I think the point you made about incarceration costing more than the actual fine itself if you're holding someone in contempt, and most judges give a lengthy amount of time for a criminal defendant to pay these fees anyway, but the cost of each day to incarcerate someone for contempt for not paying a fine or fee is exceeding the actual fee amount, is what you're saying, and yes. I appreciate that perspective. Thank you, Representative Decker. You and I had a nice talk last night about this bill, and I think it's something that we need to look into. We need to have as much information as possible before we act, but I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may make one more
Yes.
comment.
Yes, you may.
We spend a lot of time in this committee, or from time to time, quite a bit of time, talking about sentencing in Kentucky for various things. Today we heard talk about the death penalty as a sentence. I urge you to think, all of my colleagues, to think of this as a debt sentence that may need some revision. Perhaps, perhaps not. But I just want us to learn all we can, as we've mentioned, about this debt sentence. Thank you.
Very, very much. Our final presentation will be coercive control of domestic violence victims, and that is Representative Dietz. She has a guest, and I do appreciate her patience today on a Friday. You can proceed. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you, chairs, for allowing me to present this today. I'm Stephanie Dietz. I'm state representative for the 65th District, and what I have before you is a draft of a bill that would present a crucial amendment to our current domestic violence statute. We're all aware of the devastating effects of domestic violence on individuals, families, and communities. Just last week, we saw the ultimate act of domestic violence in Hardin County when Erica Riley and her mother, Janet, were leaving the courthouse after securing an EPO and were killed by the man that she had just received protection from. And only a few weeks ago in Boone County, where a group of young adults were having a birthday party and an ex-boyfriend showed up and killed several that were at the party. While the news is often riddled with examples of the above, there is a significant gap in our current laws that we can address, and that is coercive control. I've spent the last 6 years in my practice with a front row seat to coercive control, and I now understand just how important it is for us to look at patterns of control and the behavior that ultimately results in the physical act of domestic violence. For years, we've used words like mental abuse, emotional abuse, and verbal abuse. But here is what coercive control is. It involves a pattern of behavior aimed at undermining a victim's autonomy and freedom. This can include manipulation, isolation, financial control, and threats none of which necessarily involve physical violence, but are equally devastating. For example, a victim may be isolated from family and friends, or prevented from addressing financial or from accessing financial resources, leaving them trapped in an abusive relationship. One of my clients called this siloing. So if you start to take away their friends and encourage them to quit their job, encourage them to close their bank account and combine their bank accounts, we're siloing them so that they don't have access to these things. Also included, when I shared this with some of my family court judges, are threats to take children away and never let them see them again. The list goes on and on. Coercive control is the literal beatdown of a person until they feel that they have no escape, and when they feel that they have nothing left, often the physical violence begins. This legislation would give victims a way out before the physical violence starts. This legislation could save lives. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over to my guest, Christy Birch from Ion Center. Hi, you all. Thank you.
Well, it's greener now. Thank you all. Very much appreciate you. I'm honored to be here again during this interim and to share with you the experiences Kentuckians are facing when we look at coercive control. Again, my name is Christy Birch. I'm the CEO of the Ion Center for Violence Prevention. We serve 13 counties in northern Kentucky and Buffalo Trace. We work every day to try to keep violence from happening in the first place, as well as take the very best care of folks who have been hurt by violence. I am so honored to be part of two coalitions. You'll see here at Ion Center, we serve thousands of folks. I'm also part of a two coalitions because I'm a dual state designated rape crisis center and domestic violence center, serving thousands who've been impacted by violence. And I'm honored to represent the voices of survivors today with you all. Just like Representative Dietz said, though, I come with a heavy heart because of the recent things that have been happening in the last month in Kentucky. We've seen the mass shooting in Florence, Kentucky, and I've spent the last month talking to family and friends and parents who never imagined that intimate partner violence would be part of their life, and yet it is. So I come to you all today with a sense of urgency to figure out how we can collectively prevent things like this from happening, because it is tragic. It's tragic, and our families are devastated. Like Representative Dietz said, folks have been impacted by coercive control for a long time. I've seen this for the last 27 years. Even though each person has a unique story around power-based personal violence, there's always a commonality. And the biggest commonality is coercive control. It's a pattern of behavior that causes folks harm and interferes with every aspect of somebody's life. It's consistent and it's repetitive. Again, for the sake of time, I want to paint a visual here, but I won't go through all of this, but want to share some specific stories that really resonate and show what coercive control looks like for Kentuckians. In this wheel, it represents tactics abusers use to gain and maintain coercive control. Isolation, like many spokes of this wheel, can start out subtly. You may hear things like, I just want to spend all my time with you. Or, you know what, you can't hang out with that person. They don't like me. I can take care of you. I can spend all the time with you. Maybe isolation looks like moving 3 counties over, 3 states over, not letting someone learn English, using jealousy or control, or limiting freedom. Confinement is another piece of coercive control. We worked with a survivor at Ion Center who was under surveillance 24/7 and was not allowed to go outside unaccompanied. By the time she made it to us, she knew that she'd be killed if she went back because, again, she was monitored 24/7. That person never laid a hand on that person. However, they were controlled in every aspect of their life. Like Representative Dietz stated, children can be used. We worked with another survivor who had 3 children. The kids were never allowed to play outside. Mom was not allowed to potty train kids. The abuser withheld soap, hygiene products, hygiene time, controlled food, controlled whether the children were allowed to go to school. When they came to shelter, their oldest child was 12 years old, and the first day he went to school was because he was at the Ion Center. Coercive control is utter control. We see economic abuse, controlling all aspects of money and resources. We had another client who lived in a multi-million-dollar home, trying to buy school clothes for her kids, but had no access to money. She opened a credit card account, a store credit card account. When the bill came, he would not pay that bill, which resulted in her credit being bad, which resulted in her ability to leave. Somebody makes all the decisions, defines all the roles. Another survivor that we worked with was not allowed to drive, or another survivor whose abusive partner was a physician, took over all her medical care, began to diagnose her, and also gave her false diagnosis and gave medicine to drug that person so she was unable to leave. When I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about one instance. I'm talking about examples of complete domination. Someone has no free will, no liberty. So in summation, coercive control is a culmination of all of these behaviors on this wheel. And it's a loss of total self. You lose your money. Your money is no longer yours. Your time is no longer yours. Your job, your hygiene, your sleep schedule, your route to work, how you interact with friends, family, your children, strangers. None of it is yours. These tactics happen in a pattern with intention, and they're reinforced oftentimes with the threat of violence. Physical violence and sexual violence does not have to happen. It's about being reinforced. I'll leave you with a last story of a Kentuckian who was beaten one time by her partner. He beat her with a metal rod from underneath, a metal pipe from underneath the sink. And the way that he was able to maintain coercive control for years and years was by putting that metal pipe underneath the sink, and when something happened, he just pointed to it. And he was able to control her in that way. By adding coercive control to this, the protective order legislation, we have the opportunity to get ahead of this, to keep survivors safe by moving beyond danger, imminent danger, and physical violence, and acknowledge the many forms of violence that survivors experience and that immobilize them. I'm grateful for you all and to work in a Commonwealth that supports survivors. I thank you for your prior support and your continued support. I'll turn it over for questions or additional comments, Representative Dietz.
No, I'll take any questions. I would just remind everyone that our current statute actually, in order to get an EPO or an IPO, there has to be a physical act or a threat of a physical act. So what we're asking for is that we add this legislation so that this is on the front end so that maybe we can prevent the physical acts.
Thank you. I know some members had been seeking recognition earlier. Senator Berg, I know, had a question. I don't know if it probably wasn't for this group, but I'll recognize you at this point if you'd like to make a comment or a statement. Okay. Representative Nemus, I know you had sought recognition, probably may have not been on this point.
Yeah, it was on the other bill, and I'll talk to Representative Decker about that. I would ask a question here. Sure. Where did we get this language? Is it from a state? Okay. Is there a state that has the best language?
Actually, let me
and
go
also,
ahead.
Can we get your report in color because it has a map that identifies
Yes.
colors, but I can't.
But you can't see them, and let me throw that up here right now. We have 8 states who have coercive control language. And then you can also see similar language, the purple states, which you can't see purple, on your particular handout, have some form of coercive control references in their language. We can provide that in full color.
Some states were much more specific in their examples. When I've talked to different groups and we've had our calls on this, I don't know that all those specific examples are necessary because it could bind the court to just looking at those examples. And I felt that the language that we had at least was a really good start on generalizing what we were seeing as far as patterns, because it's got to be a pattern.
And this is new to me, Representative Dietz, so I don't have a position on it yet. But the generalization is what gives me great concern. And so I don't know where I am on it. I want to learn more about it, but I think maybe more particular would be better. That's just as I said here today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Banta.
Chairman, I just wanted to recognize my better half being here today, Tom Banta, and I have never appreciated him more than I do after this presentation. Thank you.
welcome. So any closing comments that you have?
Mr. Chairman, was he free to be here, or was that?
I'm not going to inquire into that, but you can if you'd like, Representative Demus.
No, I don't have anything further. Thank you for
Thank
the
you
opportunity.
For your presentation on a Friday.
Thank you.
And do you have any closing comments to my Senate counterpart? Okay. Well, if not, I don't think I have the next meeting date. Do we have that? That's okay. That's all right. We'll know soon enough.
next month, Chair.
It's next month. So if nothing further,
It's on the 19th, September 19th.
it's on September the 19th, and hopefully that's not a Friday.
It is a Thursday.
We will stand adjourned. Thank you.